As an introduction, we'd like to acknowledge that our mission at Vose Library is to advance learning, inspire curiosity, enrich lives, and promote community. With that in mind, let me introduce our guest. Jim Doble has been creating unique, mostly percussive musical instruments out of a disparate collection of materials such as wood, steel, glass, aluminum, and stone for about 35 years. In more recent years, Jim has been focusing most of his instrument building to design suitable for public spaces such as playgrounds, children's museums, and the like. Wishing further to delve into the intricacies of sound and vibration, he now has also entered into the quickly evolving realm of sound therapy, using sound and vibration to help stimulate health and personal evolution. Jim currently offers individual sound therapy sessions and group sound baths, as well as continuing to create a wide variety of musical instruments. Without further ado, I'm sorry, here he is. Without further ado, please help me welcome Jim Doble. Hi, Jim, and welcome.
Hi, thank you. And thank you all for letting me into your living rooms or wherever you are. I'm at the library because my internet is rather abysmal at my house. Anyway, so I started a musical instrument building journey about 35 plus years ago. And I'm just going to give you kind of a run through of how that happened and what I do and what I'm doing now and where I'm going. There's a slideshow that's part of it, and I'm going to be running through that pretty quickly. I apologize, some of the quality of the photos isn't great because I took them years ago on a long gone camera and storage device that is long gone. I only have like little tiny images, but it'll give you all an idea. So let's go with it. I'm going to share my screen, and of course, there is, and sorry, I'm a little slow on my thing. All right, so here's my start of my percussive career. My mother was very tolerant of me pulling out all the cots and cans when I was, less than a toddler and banging the daylights out of them all. So this is where I got, fell in love with the idea of whacking things and getting sound out of it. And then I took a break and evolved into other things. So this is the instrument that actually got me started in the music instrument making business. I had taken a workshop, an improvisation workshop with Paul Winter, who was a fairly well-known in some circles world jazz musician. And it was up in Cape Rozier as a benefit for Helen Nearing. And he had borrowed an instrument similar to this one, but that was on a wood frame that sat on the ground, and traditionally 3 people would play it. And I really enjoyed playing it and came home and decided to make one. And then I made another one, and I started evolving the design till I got to what it is here. And I was wondering if I could maybe try to sell them. And so I went to this show where I could bring things to sell, and sure enough, I brought 4 of them and they all sold, so that my business was born. So I quickly, tired of just doing with the wood, so I started expanding into other things. This is my fancier version. That instrument's now Madinda. This one's my mahogany version. This is built for playgrounds. It's pretty indestructible, and the mahogany would last just about forever outdoors. And this is my rough and tumble version of the same thing. This is tuned, believe it or not. And those are, I think that's my ash log version, which actually sounds pretty good. And I'm sorry I don't have sound samples. I didn't bother with that because Zoom is pretty lacking in sound quality as it is. But I do have sound samples on my website if anybody is interested. You can just Google Jim Doble and you'll find me that way. This is a skin drum I made, moose hide. It has a old pine log that was rotted out as a base, very deep, resonant, earth shaking. It's about 2.5 feet diameter. And as I said, would get tiring, and I decided to branch out into the xylophone world. And so this is a glass one. And these became pretty popular. I would sell things at craft shows and the like for many years. This is another glass one. This is actually the latest one I made. This one is unusual. So the first two bases towards you are chromatic. The whole notes or white keys being the closest to us, and what would be the black keys of a piano the second. This person also wanted quarter tones. So each one of the bars on the far two bases lay somewhere in between the regular natural notes of the white keys and the sharps and flats of the black keys. So this one was kind of an interesting one to make. Here is a more usual 3-octave chromatic one I made. I just tuned the keys and made the bass and fitted all that. And the person I sold it to wanted to get a little more sound out of it. So he added the resonators on the bottom. That helps clarify and amplify the sound. He did a beautiful job. I mean, I wish I had the patience to mess with with those, but I really don't. I have enough to do just making the instrumental part. This version is my prototype I made I used to play hammered dulcimer, which is a series of strings that go across similar shaped instrument. And I decided it's a bear to tune because you have 3 or 4 strings for each note. So I decided to make a version that was forever untunable. So this is glass keys laid out in the same note pattern that a hammered dulcimer would be. And I sort of got crazy with glass and tried a few different things. This didn't actually work out very well, but I thought I'd make a glass tongue drum. Kind of funky, but you could hear something out of it. This was I had a magician call me up and say, hey, could you make something musical for my coin drop trick? So this is what I came up with. They're glass keys. There's an clear acrylic frame. I kept the paper on the acrylic because I didn't want to prevent scratching and shipping. So it would be all clear if the paper was off. But basically the magician, as his final act with the coin trick, would, a whole cascade of coins would come out of his sleeves, and they would go down through the instrument, hitting the different notes on the way down, making like a waterfall sound. A few coins would bounce out, but I think they, pretty much did a good job. Oops, sorry. After I got settled in glass, I was kind of keeping my eye out for new materials, and I happened to glance at a pile of old roofing slate piled up in my barn, and kind of went, I wonder how that sounds. As it ends up, it sounds really nice. This is Monson slate from up north. which is actually a particular good sound. It's the best I've actually tried so far. And it has a similar sound quality to the glass, but maybe a little richer, let's say. Another stone instrument. This is made from countertop granite. This one the picture's not great, but the little dots in it, those are little flecks of copper and stuff. This is, what's it called? This, I can't recall right now what this particular granite is called, but it's very pretty. And it's also very dense granite, so it has great sound quality to it. And this is a version that I would sell to, maybe a school playground or what. This is not totally indestructible, but pretty sturdy. This is a total indestructible version, made of rough stone. This actually was special ordered for the National Children's Museum of Jordan. And some of the rocks are really resonant and some aren't. It's kind of like a mixed bag, and that was the intention with that. And then I started getting into metal. And if you ever dropped a wrench on a cement floor and heard it sort of ding and bounce, it's fairly resonant stuff. So I started finding old wrenches. Luce's Barn up in Washington that used to be there was a great place to find batches of old wrenches, and that sort of got me going in that. And I make this up to like a 3-octave, I've done a 3-octave wrenchophone before, chromatic for some people. I didn't have a good picture of that. And to go to the wrenches, here's the bolts. They sound pretty good too. And again, this is for, like, children's museums are very interested in the wrenchophone and boltophone because they're unusual and, something a little bit different to play. And I happened to have an old water tank in my yard and decided to see if I could make a tongue kind of drum out of it. This is what I came up with. And it's actually, this is one of my happiest surprises, besides maybe the slate xylophone. It's very resonant and very tonal. The tongues are cut to different lengths for different notes. And now that's carried me into a whole pile of similar type things, which you will see. There's one I made shortly after that first one. This one was a gift for my nephew and nieces down in Massachusetts. I used them as, this was before I had children, I used my nephew and nieces as sort of guinea pigs to try out my instruments on kids. So my brother and sister-in-law ended up with a whole pile of very noisy things, which they complained about occasionally, but the kids loved it. So here's a more regular version. Usually they would have plain paint on them, but they my customer wanted this one to look like a watermelon. This one's made out of an old propane tank, cut in half. And these are there's a ladybug version. And I went from there. I started having a hard time getting supply of old propane tanks for a while, and they were my most popular instrument. Half my business was just selling those drums, which I called whale drums. So I discovered I could buy direct from the company that just makes the tops of propane tanks. I could buy seconds from them for rather cheaply. And so that's what those are. The top part is just the formed top of a propane tank, new, but in second quality. And then the bottoms are those skinny upright propane tanks that I would cut down to size and use that as a stem. And those are called fungophones. You can imagine why. There's a couple little guys playing one. And I thought you'd be interested to see what they look like before they get all prettied up. They're all salvaged tanks and materials. That big one you see from the bottom, that's from a 1,000-gallon tank that I cut the end off of. The other ones, besides the one closest to us, those are from the regular propane tanks, referred to affectionately in the business as pigs. And then that closest one in the corner of the truck closest to us, that's from one of the smaller size pigs, which are called piglets. Another experiment, this one didn't sound good, but kind of looks kind of neat. This is kind of the epitome of, and I think I have, yeah, so these two, I decided to take a whole 500-gallon propane tank and cut, both ends are tuned on it. And this you crawl inside and play. And the resonance inside that thing is amazing. You hit one note and the opposite side is tuned similarly to this one. So basically you hit one note and the other side starts ringing, but all the other notes make this hum, and it's incredible. It's very sort of mind altering in there. And that first version, you had to basically be a yogi to crawl in and out of it. And I'm not that flexible, so I decided I'd make another one with a bigger hatch that was a little bit easier to get in and out of. And this one tuned similarly, both ends are tuned, and it's yeah, it's pretty remarkable in there. Different metal thing, it's just taking aluminum chimes and putting in a wall, so make it kid-friendly for playgrounds and whatever. This is also very popular. That's a set of copper chimes I made. That's more of something that for individual use, but the copper has a really nice tone on it. Kind of sounds kind of Indonesian, I guess is how I describe it. I get, some weird, more weird requests. This guy who's like a professional paddleball player. Imagine having that as a profession. I didn't know it existed. Anyways, he was saying, hey, can you make me something, a paddleball thing that is tuned to different notes? And so I played around a bunch, and this is what I wouldn't say it had fantastic sound, but it did work. It can have a big bowl attached to the backside to help resonate the sound. But that was it, and he seemed happy with it. So this is a Junkophone I made for the Science Museum of British Columbia. And they wanted, just something massive out of junk. And there's three sides to it. The side you can't see, there's the chimes in the background, the pipes. Those are actually tuned to a scale and made to a play. Then there's other loosely mounted stuff on the other one. That's been very popular. Then you see some of my whale drums in the background there. That red one is made from a 1,000-gallon tank, the blue one from a 500-gallon tank, and then the orange one, that one was actually made from a 250-gallon tank. And then I expanded some more into more weird kind of things. Yeah, I think this was a gas tank, like off of a semi truck, is where that tank came from, and just kind of attached a bunch of stuff to it to see how it would sound. All the loosely attached stuff you see on the side of it, that's all tuned material to specific pitches. And then the pipes are welded on, and those are more sort of ad hoc, whatever note they get out of, those longer ones will be a deeper pitch, and the shorter ones a higher pitch. But it all sort of blends nicely together. It ends up sounding pretty good. This is my more current version. That was one of my first ones, but this is what they look like now. I don't do the pipes anymore because it quickly got found out that kids like to grab onto the pipe so they can climb on top of the instrument. So I figured I better make it a little less climb friendly. But again, the things on the side of that are tuned and loosely mounted, and all the welded elements, which is pretty much everything else, is more just sort of sound makers. There's a couple of kids on another one. And here is my son, who's graduating from high school now. When he was little, he would fit inside there and with a wrench and tighten up the bolts for me that were holding on the musical aspects of that. And he kind of liked that job. He fits in there much better than I do. So I started making gongs for playgrounds as well. That's aluminum. And that got me into more gong making. This is actually a glass gong. And for years I made glass gongs that were just flat grass. Basically, I would cut a circle in the glass and drill a couple of holes and hang it up and call it good. I wanted to get something that was more gong sounding. And so it's hard to see, but if you look in the middle of it, it looks a little different there. There's actually a bump in there built into the gong. I had to make a form, bring it to a glass shop that had a big enough kiln, and they melted the glass to the shape of the form I made. And I'm sorry the picture isn't better clarity, but it didn't sound as nice as I would have liked, but it does sound nice, and it is distinctive. And it's probably, I have 3 of these, and they're probably the only ones in the world, as far as I know, the only shaped glass gongs out there. There might be others, but I certainly haven't found them. A different kind of gong. This one, actually just in this fall, I guess, the wife of my gong teacher requested a flower-shaped gong. And so I tried to figure it out. I didn't initially intend to make it look like the flower power flower, but that's sort of how it came out. And they actually sound nice. There's a little nipple in the middle of them, you can see. And that helps tighten the tone up, clarify it. And these are tuned to specific pitches. And she loved it. I mean, she was very happy with it. So these are instruments I sold to somebody for a musical playground. I would have preferred they hid the cement, but that's how they wanted to do it, I guess. But that shows a variety of my stuff there. And so the instrument making business slowly led me to into the music making business. I got into doing sound therapy. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to flick that. So I went to a couple of workshops in gong playing and whatnot, and got heavily into the gong. I already had made the aluminum ones, but I wanted to do more with them. So I started collecting gongs. And yeah, and so I started doing what's called Gong Bass, where it's kind of like a sonic meditation. People lie down, take it easy, and just let the sounds wash over them. Now, when people think of gongs, they think of winding up and like bang, as in the Gong Show from many years ago. That's one of the first things people think of when they think of gongs often. That's not how this works. I mean, gongs, to my mind, are best played gently and letting the sound build up within the gong, how it naturally wants to. And it's been quite popular. Last summer, I was doing outside Gong Bass in the Camden Amphitheater every other Monday morning. And I would get between 20 and 30 people showing up, and you can see some of them here. They look like they're half dead, and that kind of, can happen. You really zone out listening to these things. And what it does therapeutically for people is there's something about the sound of the gong, and multiple gongs especially, that I think it's partly because it's such a unique array of sounds sort of happening all at once. Our brains are not used to hearing that. And it kind of switches a gear in our minds and allows us to be just more, say, open-minded in a less visceral kind of way. Like it opens us up to different, I hate to say realities because that sounds a little bit hippie, but just to a different thought patterns in the brain, different ways of the brain working. It helps induce that, and you can use that to help make changes in your health, your attitude, all kinds of things. And hopefully I'll be doing these inside too. I was doing them at the Camden Whole Health periodically when we got hit with the COVID, and hopefully we'll be able to do those again soon. So that was a group gong bath. I also do individual sound sessions. And this was my COVID workshop. I couldn't do them inside my house anymore. So I set up a screen tent with a fan to make it COVID usable. And you see the gongs in there. I mean, I play softer when it's an individual because the gongs are up close, and you'll see I also have tuning forks in the corner close to you, and I use those as well. Usually what I'll do is play the gongs for a while and get somebody in a really deep meditative state, and then I will do fine tuning with the gongs. Those tuning forks, fine tuning with the tuning forks. You can't see them very well. The tuning forks, some of them have weights on them on the top, and those ones are for on-body use. You actually make the tuning fork ring, and then you apply the stem end onto bone structure, and that vibration will carry through your bone structure and hit all kinds of stuff inside you. It's pretty amazing and feels really nice. There's me doing that. And these are two different size forks. They're an octave apart from each other. And that's another way to use the forks, you'd use different forks that are tuned differently. This one I'm using here are a C fork and a G fork. And when you put that up to every other ear, your brain, the way your brain hears it, hears the tones, but it also picks up the difference between the two. And that interval is a fifth, which is incredibly relaxing. So you can use that to just help bring people down into a more relaxed state. I was once in a place where with a group of people, I was doing the forks on somebody, a friend of mine, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, asked me about them, and I explained them. And she pointed to her young son who was bouncing off the walls in another part and said, "Can you try them on him?" And he was a ADHD kid. He was very active. And I wrung the forks and I put him on the ears. He was willing, and he calmed right down. You could just watch it in his face. He just everything relaxed in him. And that even blew me away. I knew they were effective, but I didn't know how effective. And there's me doing the gongs for, this is one of my son's girlfriends here. And this is another instrument. It's tuned, that tallest pipe is 9 feet tall, very deep. And this is a progression of fifths. So it goes up from that very deep C at the base and then goes up, each one goes up a fifth. So then it gets very high and you can't really see them very well, but there's some really tiny chimes on towards this end of that. This is another way to gong people. They can get inside there. There's a gong on both ends. You have 2 players and that sounds pretty incredible. The sound just goes back and forth like that. And again, you wouldn't want to play it too hard with somebody in there. But people seem to enjoy that. And that looks like that is that. And I have no idea how we're doing. Oh, look at that. Okay, I blew right through those. We have all kinds of time.
That was fascinating, Jim.
Yeah, and so, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's funny, my clock doesn't, I meant to bring a clock with me. My clock doesn't appear when I'm screen sharing.
Right.
So I can start taking questions or talk more if people want.
Sure. Well, I put one in the chat because I wanted to make sure I got this question answered. What is the original, or the origin, I meant to say, of sound therapy? So I'm just curious, is it an Asian cultural foundation? Like, where does this stem from?
I think that would be really hard to pinpoint because in different cultures it was used differently, and maybe even in ancient cultures. In India, it has been used traditionally in both alternative and in, call it normal medical settings. Even in the States now, it is sort of in a different way, but it's used in hospitals. I had to take my son to Children's Hospital in Boston, and we walk in and there's people playing music in the foyer. So that kind of music therapy is getting very popular as a way to reduce anxiety and whatnot without medication. The kind I do is a little more woo-woo, let's call it. But it still has scientific base. If you think of Native American culture, the witch doctor with the rattle, that rattle actually, the way the sound of the rattle is, it makes a lot of sound fast, and actually that can tune your brain waves to different frequencies. I mean, there's science behind all this stuff. A lot of what the indigenous cultures did, the witch doctors or the so-called primitive cultures, a lot of it, has scientific base. I mean, it was sort of trial and error, back then, I assume. And yeah, and the gongs, as far as the gong use, that, used for therapy, that's fairly recent as far as I can tell. I mean, the Chinese have had gongs for years, but they used it for things, religious ceremonies, calling people to temple, that kind of thing. It's only, it's sort of a new thing to do the Gong Bass and as a purely therapeutic kind of use.
Great, thank you. Forrest has a question for us.
Yeah.
Hi there, Jim. Nice presentation, some nice instruments. I wondered if you were familiar with Newgrange in Ireland. it's a Stone Age built chamber, and the inner chamber is tuned to a G. And if you were familiar with it, do you think it was used as some form of, again, Stone Age music therapy or sound therapy?
It sounds like it. Awesome. I'd love to go visit that. I haven't heard of it actually, which I'm surprised because I'm very into the stone thing. Yeah, it very well could have. It's hard to say. I mean, there's a group, um, believe it or not, around the world, there's a large group of gong people, and they all seem to know each other. And a lot of them are into more obtuse things, and one of them is things that are called rock gongs. Rock gongs aren't, the same shape. They don't look like my gongs. They're not hung up. They're just basically big rocks that are musical, that are set. Sometimes they're set so that they'll ring better, and sometimes they're just sitting on the ground. But there's, in Africa, they're kind of strewn around in various places, and they've been played for centuries because they have pock marks. You hit the stone in a certain place, it'll make a certain tone, and you hit it someplace else, it makes another tone. And those spots have like indents worn in them from all the playing they've had. And, it's hard to say what those were for. They might have been used for some kind of therapy healing thing. They might have been just musical. Yeah. Yeah.
On kind of the same note, cats' purrs are known to, or are thought to be a very healing frequency. And those are also, no matter what the size of the cat, tend to be right around a G, which is the same as that chamber at Newgrange, which
Really?
raises a lot of interesting questions as far as, is the frequencies that fall in the G range,
Right.
do they have anything to do with some healing?
That's, what, there's a lot of discussion about that in the sound healing, sound therapy world. Whether because there's a lot of people out there that are trying to sell you something that, say this frequency, like what was it? I think 512 hertz is supposed to, somebody's putting out there as the frequency of love. And trying to sell you something that, a tuning fork or something that has a frequency. And there's a lot of stuff out there about frequencies and what effect. I mean, I think they can, but I think it's also very different for each individual. Different frequencies will affect people differently. There's a woman who did tuning fork work who actually came up with a map of the spine and somehow figured out that each of your vertebrae are tuned to a different note. And at first she came up with a set of tuning forks, one to match each vertebrae. And then she came up with an electronic device to do the same thing, to put the same, to put a tone directly on the vertebrae. If you have problems or whatever, it's supposed to help heal it. It's a good question whether that works or not. It's hard to say. She's sold on the idea, but I would think people with different size backs would have, their vertebrae would be differently toned. So yeah, it's hard to, that's a very good question. And it's definitely, there's a lot of noise around that, around the sound community. Yeah. I saw that somebody type in a question.
Yes. Tim and Lori, two questions. One is, how do you tune a section? You mentioned that a few times, with an electronic tuner, question mark. And then the other question is, I noticed on your xylophones, black insulators. What is that?
Okay. So the tuning, yes, you think after like 35 years of tuning, I would have developed a good ear. I haven't. I can hear when something's off, but that doesn't mean I can fix it. So I rely heavily on electronic tuners. And actually my favorite is, there's all kinds of digital tuners out there, and I haven't found one yet that I like. So I use I do use sort of as a semi-digital analog tuner, an old Korg tuner that's chromatic, and that seems to pick up, because I do a lot of stuff that's very deep sounding as well as very high, and this tuner has the best ability to pick up the range of everything that I'm doing. As far as how tuning, the tuning itself, you take if you're tuning a bar, so say I have a wood bar, and it has to sit on something soft for it to resonate, and it has to sit in a certain spot on the bars. A spot that's 22.5% of the length in from the end is called the nodal point, the point of least vibration, and that's where you would mount it. But to tune it, you set it on something where you can hear it like that, and then you can shorten it to heighten the pitch, or you can gouge underneath the bottom to lower the pitch. And those are the two tricks. Now you can all become xylophone experts and build your own, because that's really all you need to know. I hope that answers. That was so the black, was that on the log xylophone?
Tim or Lori, do you want to clarify what your question is there?
On the log xylophone.
Any of the wood ones.
Okay, yeah. So on the log xylophone, there was some black tubing that I used to just separate the notes on there. So there's rope holding the bars, and then I have the black tubing over the rope just to use as a separator. But the bars want to ring freely. If they're on something hard, the sound will absorb through the hard surface. So on the smaller instruments like the glass and the stone and the wrenches, I tend to use felt. Very often I'll just get weather stripping felt from the hardware store and build up layers of that and use that to put underneath it. Some of the bigger instruments like the big mahogany xylophone, I'll use a heavier, dutier felt, a more industrial kind of sound. But a foam rubber felt, anything like that will work well.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if anybody else has a question for Jim or a comment. Forrest is saying, try the Peno tuner on your smartphone. Works great with very low frequencies.
Oh, thank you. Try that. I did try. There is a tuner. I can't remember what it's called, but I did do a tuner. The nice thing that the tuners, what's that? The nice thing that the tuners on your phone will do is will tell you the exact frequency it is, where my old Korg tuner doesn't do that. It just tells you, the note, the octave, and how far off you are. So when, like, I had a gong aficionado want me to make him a whole pile of aluminum gongs that were all tuned to specific pitches. So I used my phone one, but I wasn't really happy with when I was using, so I will try the Peno. Thank you for suggesting that.
Any other questions or comments for Jim this evening? Everybody's
Yes.
so quiet.
I have one more.
Great.
Did you ever try to make a what do you call the drums that are they're out of a barrel drum, like a
kalimba, like a steel pan drum?
Yes, a pan drum
out of a 55-gallon barrel. I get asked that every now and then, and I don't, because there's a lot of people who are really good at making those. um, and that's an art that, would take me probably, a few years to get.
It looks hard. Yeah, it looks like a difficult thing to do. But
Yeah, I mean, it's to do it badly, it's probably not that hard. I would
Yeah.
want to do it well. But, I try to do things that other people aren't doing. And that was my impetus to, getting into it was finding new sounds of new materials or using old materials in new ways, or make them more playable.
So on the propane bottom drums, or whatever bells, or I guess drums, do you just shorten the loop of the circle, the lobe, I guess you'd call it? Is
Yeah,
it just, it's just a little shorter?
yeah, that's good question.
But
Yeah,
how do
so
you tune that?
all right, well, another good question. Well, that's evolved over the years. So, yeah, so I cut the tongues to different lengths, and that will determine the pitch. Using old tanks, they're not all the same as far as metal thickness, metal hardness, all that kind of stuff, which can influence tuning. So I've done enough of them where I can know pretty close to how long a certain note has to be. But then I always have to fine tune. And the way I used to do it is just shorten the tongue, or I would, at the base of the tongues, there were holes drilled. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So sometimes I would elongate those if I needed to have a lower pitch than what was there. But that made for like a, sort of some funky, sometimes, especially for playgrounds, if I had to shorten the tongue too much, it would make a hole where fingers could get stuck in. So what I discovered is I could turn the drum upside down and grind the underside of the tongues to do the tuning.
I see. Wow.
So if I have a tongue that's too low pitch, I can grind off the tip of the tongue, and that will heighten the pitch. And if it's too high, then I can actually lower it quite a bit by grinding right at the base of the tongue.
I see. Yeah.
Which
So
is-
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how did you cut the slot? Is that a cutting torch?
Yeah, that's actually evolved over the time. I used to just use jigsaws. And
Took some blades up.
yeah, I went through a lot of, part of the science of all this is finding the right blade to use. And I've tried every single blade you can imagine. And anybody that wants to cut me with a jigsaw, I'll tell you right now, there's a Canadian company. I'll say, what are they called? You know what? I can't remember, but they're expensive and they're Canadian, but they're really good. Wish I could remember what they are. But so right now, what I do is, if the tongue's long enough, I use a metal cutting circular saw to cut the straight part of the tongue. So just the sides that are straight. I'll use a jigsaw to cut between where the hole is drilled and where I cut those, where I use the circular saw. So that'll be that little part of the curve at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then I'll use, depending if it's a thin tank, I'll use a jigsaw to cut the top of the tongue. If it's a thick tank, then I now use a plasma cutter to cut that.
Nice.
And that
Yeah.
saves me a lot of vibration.
Sure.
When I make a mess of these and I'm doing a lot of jigsawing, the vibration is going through my whole body, and I can feel my spine just going crunch. Yeah. So what I try to do, if I do a lot of that, is I have an inversion table that hangs me by my feet, and that way I straight back out again.
That's great.
The hazards of the job.
Wow.
Um,
No, that's great. Well, it was really great.
well, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, everyone's pretty quiet tonight.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, isn't it?
Wow. Must be the rain. Oh, well, you know, Jim, this is a great lesson for every parent to make sure you let your kids rummage through the pan
There you go. Yeah.
because, you know, you just never know what will come of it.
Well, actually, if you don't want your child to become a somebody banging things out in the woods of Maine, then yeah, maybe we better steer them away from the pots and pans.
No, we're all good. We're all good. Well, I'm so glad you were with us tonight. This has been fascinating and interesting, and I'm going to keep my eye on your gong sound therapy because those people look pretty comfy there in that amphitheater.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So if you're interested at all in partaking of any of that, or you want to hear sound samples or look at photos of other stuff, I'm pretty easy to find on the web. Just Google Jim Doble and you'll find me there.
And it's called Elemental Design.
Yeah, that's the name of the company, but I have a pretty good web presence.
Yes.
So yeah, so Google me or Elemental Design, either one will get you
Excellent.
to my stuff.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. That's great.
You're welcome.
Very
My
nice
pleasure.
presentation. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
so
for doing
that
it.
concludes our presentation for this evening. All of us at Vose Library, thank you for attending our Zoom with Vose Wednesday series and hope that you will help spread the word and join us next week, May 12th, with Lorraine Francis. She will be discussing community needs, mostly food insecurity for Union and the surrounding area. Good night, everybody. Be well and stay healthy.
Bye-bye.